Good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Millsy. Back to Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews. This show where I brew version 1.0 deck lists of the Commander ready for us in my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and we're back to do today. The deck list is going to be down in the description for you below, as well as I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video. Like, comment, subscribe, share, check it out. All those links in the description. I'd appreciate it. But today, we're kicking off week 2 of Final Fantasy content, hitting some new fun commanders. And I wanted to talk about a commander a lot of people have been talking about. We're talking about Celes Rune Knight, 4-mana 4/4 Mardu Human Wizard Knight. It says when Celes enters, we're going to discard any number of cards and draw that many. And then whenever one or more other creatures enter, if one or more of them entered from a graveyard or was cast from a graveyard, we get to put a counter on each creature we control. There's a lot of ways you could take advantage of that rider entering in from the graveyard, but I think probably one of the easiest solutions for this, and one that I saw going around, and I think it makes the most sense to me because it's the easiest to make a game plan around it, is Persist. Persist is a mechanic on creatures to say whenever that creature dies, they're going to come back to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it, as long as they didn't have one on it. How this is going to interact with Celes is going to then put a +1/+1 counter on it. Due to the magic rules, those counters are going to cancel out, meaning that Persist creature will no longer have a counter on it, and then it's fair game to come back. And what our goal of our deck's going to try to do is sacrifice that Persist creature, so it's going to come back, and try to find a way to profit from that. There's a lot of ways we can do that. If we're in the middle of combat and we have unblocked creatures, that's a solution that can lead to enough damage to knock out the opponent that the creature's attacking, whether it be Celes or other things. But if we're not in combat, there's basically a lot of aristocratic ways we can use to win the game. So we're kind of playing an aristocrat decks that also can double as a combat deck, right? And we're going to just grow our board of creatures and make them hard to deal with. I want to give a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a little bit early, check out that link down below. All right, so ideally you need 3 things. Well, 4 if you think about it, but other than Celes, you need 3 things: sack outlet, persist creature, and then value outlet. So as far as sack outlets go, there's a lot of options. Remember on Millsy Brews, we try to hold ourselves to a budget. So I was trying to keep myself in a more budgetary way. The other thing I was trying to do was find sack outlets that could grow themselves to make them a threat. Something like Bartolome can sack a creature to put a counter on itself. Carrion Feeder sacks a creature to put a counter on itself. Nantuko Husk sacks a creature to get +2/+2 on a turn. Remember that this can ideally make the Persist train work because this creature is then getting bigger, right, as we're sacrificing these things, and maybe we can sneak in a big attack with one of them for some big damage. Viscera Seer and Woe Strider both scry us 1 whenever we sack a creature, and then Yeheni can sack a creature to give itself indestructible, but still gives us an option to sacrifice a creature and make that loop happen. But we don't have just sack outlets that are on creatures. We have Altar of Dementia that can mill a player for cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power. This is important because with a Persist creature in Celes, this is a loop that can mill all of our opponents out. Blasting Station says we can tap it and sack a creature to deal 1 damage to our creature or player. And whenever a creature comes back in, we get to untap Blasting Station. So Blasting Station, right, sacrificing a Persist creature is going to lead to enough damage to knock out all of our opponents. Same thing with Goblin Bombardment. You could sack a creature to deal damage to any target. We can deal enough damage to our opponents to knock them out that way. So we've kind of got to build this value engine. But once we build it, unless our opponents have instant speed removal, right, we have all the pieces we need. So how about creatures with Persist? Well, there's a lot of options for that. The easiest and best Persist option is going to be Murderous Redcap. Mainly because we don't need anything else to do anything with it because it has an ability. This is whenever it comes into play, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. Well, this means that every time it's coming in, it's dealing damage to a player, and so we don't need another piece. But for the rest of them, we will need that. Lesser Manticore, Lingering Tormentor, both having Persist. Obstinate Gargoyle, Persistent Constrictor, Puppeteer Click. Each of these have Persist. Now, the fun thing about Puppeteer Click is it also adds the option to start bringing creatures from our opponent's graveyards back onto the battlefield under our control, which is kind of an interesting ability that we get to add on top. Putrid Goblin, Restless Apparition, Wing Rattle Scarecrow has Persist as long as we control a black creature, which Celes is, so that's going to give us that. But you can see here, a lot of these creatures are cheap, meaning we can get them out of the right time, and worst case scenario, we can reanimate them back out of the graveyard at the right time if need be, since we are in the perfect colors for that. Well, okay, let's say we have a Persist creature, but we don't have a sack outlet, or we don't have one of these other creatures. Well, Imperial Recruiter and Recruiter the Guard are both creatures that when they come in, let us search our library for a creature with power 2 or less for the Recruiter of Imperial Recruiter and toughness 2 or less for Recruiter the Guard. All of the sack outlets we talked about that are on creatures do fulfill that, as well as we do have a couple pieces we'll talk about in a second that help us finish this combo that fall into that, meaning that these two are going to help us go find that. Now, if you want to take this deck up on the power skill, you can add in Ranger Captain Avios, which we'll talk about in the considering section. You can add straight tutors if you want to. There's ways to make finding this a lot quicker. But at bracket 3 here, we're not trying to find it exclusively that quickly. We want to draw into it and do things like that. But we do have a couple ways to do that. But let's say someone, kills one of our key persist or one of our sack outlet triggers. Well, we have ways to get things back. Things like Alesha can do it whenever we attack. You put a counter on it, and then at the beginning of your end step, you can bring creatures back. Gao, if creatures left our, if a card left our graveyard this turn, it deals damage equal to each opponent, can kind of chip away over the course of turns. But we have things like Persist, Reanimate, Unearth, Victimize. These are cards that are just getting creatures from our graveyard back to the battlefield. And all three of these, Persist, Reanimate, and Unearth, are going to hit pretty much every creature we need. Victimize lets you sack one creature to get two back, so you'll be able to bring two of the right pieces back at the right time. But truthfully, your goal here is if something needs to get into the graveyard where we need to pitch it or it dies, we could still get it back. But all right, let's say we have the sack outlet, we have the Persist creature, we have Celes, but we don't really have any other way to do anything else with that loop. Well, here's how we do that. We have things like Agate Instigator that says whenever a creature we control enters, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So there you go. That's going to start dealing a damage every time. Elastil Core says whenever one of our creatures dies, each opponent loses a life. Blood Artist says whenever another creature dies, target player loses a life and we gain a life. So now you're talking about dealing out a life or a damage each time something happens, right? Bringing that game closer and closer to an end. Mayhem Devil, whenever we sacrifice a permanent, deals 1 damage to any target. Molten Gate Creeper, whenever a creature comes in, 1 damage to each opponent. Sir Gonrad's actually kind of fun. It says whenever another creature dies or a creature's put in the graveyard from any for, or a creature leaves our graveyard, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Conrad's actually going to deal 2 damage in a Persist loop, 1 when the creature dies, and 1 when the creature comes back, which is kind of fun. It's going to help shorten up the loop a little bit, but I think you can start to see how these pieces are going to work together. Woody Roastmaster, damage whenever a creature comes in. Zulaport Cutthroat, everybody loses a life and we gain a life whenever a creature dies. Same thing with the Bashed Remembrance. So you can start to see we're trying to find ways to put around this loop to basically profit and end the game through the loop, right? Whereas, again, best case scenario, you attack with something like Celes or a couple other creatures and you can do this loop to make them, pretty huge in combat. Other best case scenario, find 3 of these pieces and Celes and just make it happen. I wanted to kind of make this combo deck kind of fun, try to make it happen. And like I said, as you go up the bracket scale, you can make this more consistent, more refinable, and more searchable. You also have things like Impact Tremors and War Leader's Call, again, 1 damage whenever a creature comes in, to take advantage of that Persist. But I've said it before on the show, I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. This is my version 1.0 shot at this Celes idea. And I think going into testing, we'll want to see one of 2 things. One, do we have enough ways to have those sweeteners? We have things like Cruel Celebrant that can add another way for our opponents to lose one and gain. We talked about Ranger Captain of Eos being able to go get certain things and put them into our hand. And then Priest of the Foul Rites is a creature that allows us to get a creature back from our graveyard. Do we need to look into more reanimation? Is that an option? These are just ideas to think about as we're getting ourselves into testing, is which of the pieces are we seeing the most often? Are we not seeing enough sack outlets? Are we not seeing enough Persist? Are we not seeing enough of these dies triggers? Which are the things we need to see more of? And then we can bring those in to sweeten up the combo. Well, let's get into what we do. I love to do the most on the channel and get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of playtest on our channel is not to find Magical Christmas Land. It's not to show off all our best plays, but it's to get in some game snares and kind of understand what we're looking for. This hand's a teeny bit awkward, and we don't have white, but we do have the Altar. We do have the Scarecrow. We do have Bloodflow Connoisseur, which is a sack outlet, and we do have a Damager. So we've kind of got almost literally every piece but enough mana for Celes And I think it's worth giving a shot just to see what can happen for us. So turn 1, there's Talisman, so that knocks out our white mana. We literally just need 1 more mana and then get all of our pieces down, and we're just in great shape. Well, bing, bing, there we go. There's our 4th land, so there's our 4th piece of mana. So now we have enough mana for Celes. We just need to get all the pieces down in the right order so that we can demonstrate, get this combo going. So I think no matter what we do, we need to start getting our pieces down. I kind of would rather start getting the pieces down that are going to be the hardest to remove first. Maybe like War Leader's Call here first. My thought behind that is because then our opponents had the least amount of time possible to respond. Now we've got 2 Wither Persist creatures, so that's killer. Now we've got a good piece going there. Now I'm thinking Alter. And well, the Scarecrow doesn't have Persist yet, but it would give us a nice option next turn for that. And then if nobody responds, now we have Celes. This now has Persist because we control Celes. Sack to the Altar to mill for 2, right? It has Persist, right, to come back. Remember, counter because of Celes. Celes grows. War Leader's Call sees it and deals the damage. So this loop's actually going to end quicker because of War Leader's Call than because of Dementia, right? Because our opponents would have effectively 300 cards to mill, whereas War Leader's Call only needs to see this 40 times to make this happen. And arbitrarily, I'm going to say before we get into more playtests, yes, I know, removal, interaction. If anybody has any removal for specifically Celes is probably the piece they need to take out here. I guess they could take out the Persist creature. They don't know that we have another one. But it's going to be easier for our opponents to take out one of these than it is for one of these, right? And I think that's important. Now, the other thing to remember is that when our opponents choose to try to respond to this combo is going to be the most important thing. So if you're sitting across from a deck like this and you're going, well, when do I respond? The answer is when I sacrifice the Scarecrow to this altar and I put this ability on the stack, that is when you remove Celes. And the reason that is because now that Celes is gone, this gets to come back with Persist, but it doesn't lose that -1/-1 counter. So now it doesn't have, right, it can't be persisted anymore. And now, right, now the combo's gone, right? It's really Celes that needs to be here. I actually didn't even do the draw trigger with Celes like I should have. Important thing to note that a +1/+1 buff from something like War Leader's Call does not diminish the -1/-1 counter. It is only the +1/+1 counter with Celes that is going to diminish that. So it's important to know these interactions and how they work so that as you pilot this and you understand where these pieces are coming in, that you know how to do it. So we showed that one. We kind of got there we needed to. Let's try another one here. So here we're keeping a 3-lander with the Soul Rings. We've got plenty of mana. Here's a Bloodthorn Vampire. Sack a creature, gets +2/+2 end of turn. So there's our sack outlet. Blasting Station is also a sack outlet, so interesting. And then we have Bastion for the, the burn things out. But we also have it with the Blasting Station. So literally all we're missing here is a Persist creature. Well, okay. We managed to luck ourselves into one, but that's a-okay. I think we'll start tapped here on this one. We gotta unfortunately have something come in tap. I thought here's soaring into the Blasting Station. There we drew another Persist creature in the Constrictor. So now we've got a couple pieces and another one in the Spellduster. So we're seeing lots of Persist. There's our sack outlet. Now we just need to get one of them down and Celes down safely without getting them removed. That's now the key, right? The key. Can't get the Constrictor down. We only have 4 mana this turn because that Dragon Skull Summon unfortunately has to come in tab. So I'm thinking the Tormentor. Again, the ideal world is this lives to our turn. We put Celes down. It doesn't really matter what we do with this. And we have the combo with the Blasting Station, right? But in an ideal world where somebody removes the Tormentor, well, then we just Celes. We have the Victimize. So we could go this plus the Victimize to get, we could sack this to get the Tormentor back, where we could pitch a creature, right? When Celes comes in, we could pitch these 2 creatures if we wanted to, or whatever combination of the cards in our hand, play this, play the Victimize, get the 2 Persist creatures back. And this is even more ideal in some senses, because then we could start this loop more than once. The only problem is Blasting Station is not a full sack outlet. You have to tap it and sack. So like if somebody responded to it, we can't restart it immediately like we could with the vampire, which is kind of the reason I like the vampire as a sack outlet over the blasting station. But remember, the vampire doesn't have any push to make it happen. That's where we would need the bastion, right? So you can kind of see we had two different lines. We have the blasting station line, and if somebody blew up this line, we could just as easily, pitch. Right, so if we're back in this scenario where we have this in our hand. Sorry, we have this out. We play Celes, right? So we get to pitch any number and draw that many. I could stick 2 persist creatures in the graveyard. I draw 3, right? And now I have enough mana to victimize, and the Bastion makes a token which I could then use to victimize back, right? So now we have a different line that we can use to get creatures back. Truthfully, I don't think the playtests are going to be very long on this one, because I think we're just trying to demonstrate that we have the combo, and whether your opponents have the removal or not. But I think it's still important to show a couple ways to do this, even though we won't get the the normal 10 or 15 minutes of playtest we get in a normal episode. But let's do a third one. Keep it a 3-lander, so I like that. Again, just one off of Celes, but we don't mind that at all. Connoisseur, there's a sack outlet. Manticore, there's a persist outlet. Conrad, there's our sweetener, and we have a victimize to help get some things back in case we fold. So I like this. We got pretty much all of our pieces. We just need one more mana, and I think we're good to go. Well, there's the mana, so that's pretty nice. Again, now we just need to deploy our things in the right ways. Stuff isn't getting blown up. Again, I can run this persist creature out if I want to. I have to pitch a card to do it. I just don't know if it makes the most sense, because we're just basically asking for it to get removed. I kind of like waiting a second just to see what we get. Well, there's Recruiter of the Guard. So that's interesting. You can go get another piece. I'm kind of thinking the Connoisseur here. And I'm thinking the Graven Cairns for Celes. Celes comes in. The Recruiter. I guess the Swamp, and we'll draw 3 just to see what we get ourselves into. And now, right on our next turn, we've got 5 mana. We have the Manticore, so we have the line here. The question is, how do we sweeten? Right? How do we sweeten? And I think if from here, I guess it could have been putting Conrad in the grave instead of the Swamp and victimizing them both back with the Manticore, right? Because the Manticore would come back because of Persist. That probably would have been the better line. So if I do that, right, I play the Manticore, I have to pitch a card. Oh, I have to pitch a card. Well, there we go. I have to pitch a card to cast it. We pitch the Conrad. Now we victimize the Manticore, bringing back Sir Conrad and the Recruiter, right? This is going to trigger bringing it back. Actually, when these 2 come in, we're going to all get a counter because of Celes. But then, remember, this Manticore comes back with Persist. We get a counter here. That is a Conrad trigger. Right? Yes, because the creatures would have to come back, and then Manticore would go off, if I recall correctly. Worst case scenario, even if this doesn't trigger Conrad now, we sack this to the Connoisseur and we start the loot. You have to get rid of the Conrad. Recruiter could go get us something else. Could go get us any one of our damage pingers like Gatekeeper or Agate Instigator. Well, no, because it's 3 toughness. Witty Roastmaster. Any of those damage ETBers, for a little bit of safe backup. But, truthfully, we have a backup sack outlet. We just need a backup damager with the Recruiter, and then I think we're just golden and good to go. I know that to some players, this idea of this combo is not going to be fun for you, and I completely understand that. But I think some people like this idea of his deck. Some people want to show off these mechanics like Persist and things leaving the graveyard, and I think Celes is literally baked to do that. And I think it's going to be very popular, and I wanted to show off something different on the channel for it. But I'd love to know, what do you think of this idea of Celes down in the comment section below, and I will catch you all next.